I'm very excited about talking to you because Prime Minister Paul Martin will meet with the 14th Dalai Lama in a few days, and they will discuss spiritual matters. Martin will be the first Canadian Prime Minister to come face-to-face with the 68-year-old Buddhist holy man. The Chinese government has exerted pressure on Martin not to meet with the Dalai Lama. Some have said this would be like President Bush meeting with the Quebecois separatists. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't know exactly what the diplomatic ins and outs are, but the Dalai Lama represents a theocracy that no longer exists, and is thought of very highly by people all around the world. I've written about Tibet and the kind of country it was under the Dalai Lama. Of course, he was only about 15 or 16 at the time, but still, it was a country of immense poverty and immense exploitation by the rich lords and lamas over the peasantry. It was not the kind of place I'd want to live. He's been made into a hero because it was the Chinese communists who kind of unseated him. And so he is seen as somebody to be much admired. Now, whether he should be meeting or not with this other gentleman, I don't know.
Okay, now we know that the Dalai Lama is become a shining star among a lot of the Hollywood crowd. I think a guy by the name of Michael Valpy, who is a writer for the Globe and Mail, talked about them, called him the Tibetniks. Sharon Stone says that the Dalai Lama is the hardest working man in spirituality. Richard Gere, you wrote that Richard Gere gushed that the Dalai Lama is the greatest living human being. Goldie Hawn introduced him in Vancouver. Could you talk about this fascination by some Westerners with feudalism?
They don't see him as a representative of feudalism. They see him as the representative of a great spiritual movement. Certainly Buddhism is a spiritual movement. Buddhist techniques of meditation and the like can be very useful for people and may put you in a good place. But the society that Tibet had back in the 1950s was a terrible feudalism. The peasants were taxed ruthlessly. They were taxed when they got married, taxed when they died, taxed when a child was born, taxed when they bought a cow or sheep. Some were mutilated if they didn't pay their debts. They were terribly in debt. They were exploited by the rich monasteries and rich lords, and the Dalai Lama presided over this whole thing. He was both a spiritual leader and a terrestrial leader too, a secular leader, if you will. Whether you want to blame him, hold him accountable or not is a different question. As I say, he was only a youth when the whole thing was overthrown. But I don't see that Tibet of that era as a society that I should treasure. And there are a lot of Westerners who believe that Tibet under the Dalai Lama was a society so pristine and so admirable. It was free of all the materialistic contaminants of Western society. And I guess it's a comfort to think that somewhere in the world, sometime in history, there was this really decent, beautiful place where everybody lived in symbiotic harmony with each other, and that was that. And really, it wasn't like that. There was a lot of grief, a lot of conflict, a lot of rather brutal oppression, a lot of resentment by the peasants. I mean, they did not support the CIA-sponsored counter-revolution against Chinese occupation. The people the CIA sent in were usually the sons of lamas or lords or whatever well-to-do group, and none of them survived. And the Chinese didn't have that big an army in Tibet either. They didn't have that many troops. And the Chinese were not exactly angels themselves. What they did bring in is a lot of Chinese population into Tibet, and often treated the Tibetans with little respect. But they did get rid of this awful, punitive, regressive, retrograde feudal system and this feudal theocracy. One of the things the theocratic class did was go around and pick out 9-year-old boys from the peasant families and bring them into the monasteries to be used as sexual objects and recruited into the monkhood, or used as soldiers or domestic servants or whatever else. And a lot of those monks left when the Chinese gave the option to the monasteries and said, anybody who wants to leave can leave, and thousands of them left, never wanted to be there. The older monks stayed and continued on a very modest government stipend, plus whatever money they could make by presiding over weddings and funerals and the like. So I think there is freedom for Buddhism in Tibet under the Chinese communists, but very little encouragement of it. And of course, a lot of the monasteries and the monastery lands were taken away and